Before we jump into this wild story, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these Karen tales of chaos and karma can travel. Now, you're probably wondering how we ended up at that moment. A woman standing in my driveway, covered head to toe in white powder, cereal flakes tangled in her hair, and bits of wrappers swirling around her like confetti from some twisted celebration. I stood a few feet away, arms crossed, calm as a quiet summer morning. My dog Biscuit just stared at her as if she had personally offended the entire concept of breakfast. But to understand that scene, you need to know how it all began, because this story didn't start with drama. It started with something simple, a trash can. When I moved into that neighborhood 3 years ago, it seemed like the kind of place where nothing ever happened. A quiet suburban cul-de-sac with identical houses, neat lawns, and neighbors who smiled politely, but rarely spoke more than a few words. I liked it that way. I worked from home, took Biscuit for walks in the evenings, and enjoyed the peace. The only thing I'd heard before moving in was that the HOA took itself very seriously. Not surprising, every suburban community has at least one overzealous rule enforcer. Ours just happened to have a name, Ms. Lauren. The first time I met her, she introduced herself like she was the mayor of the street. Short blonde hair, perfect posture, clipboard in hand like it was part of her identity. She didn't smile. She didn't even say hello, not really. Instead, she said, "We take community standards very seriously around here." That was her greeting. I nodded, said something polite, and figured that was the end of it. And for a while it was. We didn't talk and the peace held. But routines have a funny way of creating conflict. Every Tuesday night I took out the trash and set the bin near the curb, same spot every week. The city truck came Wednesday morning. No problems. Until one morning when I walked outside and saw the can sitting directly in the middle of my driveway. Not by the curb, not where I left it. Centered like someone had carefully placed it there on purpose. I didn't think much of it. Maybe the workers did it. Maybe the wind, though that didn't make much sense. I shrugged and moved it back. The next week the same thing happened. Only this time the trash can was angled slightly, as if someone was sending me a silent message I couldn't yet decode. Then I saw her, Ms. Lauren, standing at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, just watching me. Not pretending to be casual, just staring. I raised a hand. She didn't raise hers back. The third week, she made her move. I was outside with Biscuit when she approached. Her steps were sharp and deliberate, like she was walking toward a courtroom podium. She pointed at my trash can as if it were evidence in a trial. "You're placing your bin too close to the street line," she said. "The wheels should touch the inner property border, not the asphalt." I blinked. My bin was in the exact same place as everyone else's. "This is where the city pickup guidelines say to put it," I told her. She smiled. Not the friendly kind, but the kind that says she's already decided you're wrong. "City guidelines are general," she replied. "The HOA has its own expectations." I glanced up and down the street. Every trash can was just like mine. "No one else seems to do that," I said. Her smile vanished. "Some of us care more about maintaining standards." Then she turned and walked away. I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. A week later, I woke up to the sound of clattering outside. I stepped out and saw my trash scattered all over the driveway. Coffee grounds, cereal boxes, old mail, paper towels, like a chaotic art project. Biscuit wagged his tail, thrilled by the mess. I sighed, assuming raccoons were to blame. That is, until I saw the footprint. A clean, unmistakable shoe print right in the middle of the debris. Not paw marks, a human footprint. Then came the voice behind me. "Some animals just make awful messes," she said. I turned. There she was, hands behind her back, pretending innocence. Her tone was too sweet, too careful, the kind that dares you to call it out. I said nothing. Just cleaned up the mess, but something shifted inside me that morning. A line had been crossed, quiet, invisible but undeniable. Over the next few days I started noticing patterns. When I was home, the trash can stayed upright. When I wasn't, it would be tipped over. Not fully dumped, just enough to make me notice. Annoyance is a tactic, because irritation leads to anger and anger leads to mistakes. I refused to give her that satisfaction. Until one afternoon, I came home earlier than usual and saw her, Ms. Lauren, walking away from my trash can. That same smug little smile on her face, like she'd just won something. Biscuit let out a single bark and she turned. Our eyes met. For just a split second, her expression faltered. A tiny crack in that perfect little facade. "Just making sure it's within compliance," she said. "You don't actually hold an official HOA position, do you?" I asked. She paused, a long, deliberate pause, then said, "Some of us don't need titles to have authority." She turned and walked away. That was the moment. Not when she knocked over the bin, not when she lied, but when she said that. Because people like her don't crave order, they crave control, and she had convinced herself that she owned this street. I went inside, washed my hands, and sat on the couch with Biscuit curled at my feet. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. If she wanted a game, then the game needed rules. And this time I would set them. This wasn't about trash anymore. It was about respect, boundaries, and the simple right to live peacefully without someone inserting themselves into your life just to feel powerful. That night, I watched the street from my window. It was quiet, calm, but the tension hung heavy in the air like humidity before a storm. The next morning I placed the trash can in the same exact spot, same angle, and I waited. Not outside, but mentally, because now I wasn't reacting. I was preparing. If she wanted a war, she had just declared one. But I knew I couldn't confront her head on. People like Ms. Lauren don't back down when challenged. They escalate. They push harder, louder, and more aggressively, because backing down means admitting they were never truly in control. So if I wanted this to end, I had to be smarter than her. Still, I wanted to try one last time, to see if simple conversation could change the direction of this strange, silent battle. So the next evening, just before sunset, I walked across the street. Biscuit trotted beside me, leash loose, his tail wagging, blissfully unaware of the tension that thickened the air. I knocked on her door. It opened instantly, as if she'd been standing there waiting. She looked at me like I'd interrupted something sacred, though her house behind her was perfectly still. "Yes?" she asked, her tone clipped and formal. I kept my voice calm. "I think we got off on the wrong foot. I've been trying to follow the standard placement for the trash bin. If I'm doing something wrong, I'd just appreciate a clear explanation." Her expression didn't soften. Her eyes narrowed into a sharp line. "I've explained everything," she said. "If you can't understand simple spatial guidelines, that's not my problem." I took a breath. "I'm just trying to avoid conflict." "Conflict?" she repeated as if the word was foreign to her. "I'm not the one creating conflict. I'm correcting disorder. You should be thanking me." And that was it, her truth laid bare. She genuinely believed she was the hero in this story. Biscuit let out a small whine, sensing the tension. Her gaze flicked to him and something cold flickered across her face. "Please keep your dog off my lawn," she added, even though he wasn't anywhere near it. I nodded once and turned to leave. There was no point in arguing. You can't reason with someone whose identity depends on being right. But after that conversation, the harassment didn't stop. It grew worse. It started with photographs. Each morning, I'd leave for work and come home to find printed pictures taped to my front door, close-up shots of my trash can from different angles, like evidence in a courtroom. No note, no accusation, just pictures. Then came the letters. They looked official, citing fines and HOA violations. But the formatting was off, the language awkward, and the signature line was blank. I brought one to an actual HOA board member, a friendly neighbor named Dennis who lived 4 houses down. "That's not from us," Dennis said, frowning at the paper. "And she's not authorized to issue warnings." He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "She does this sometimes. She likes to overstep, so everyone knew, but no one stopped her. The neighborhood tolerated her the way people tolerate constant background noise, irritating but easier to ignore than confront. And honestly, I understood why. Confronting her meant dealing with her every single day afterward. Then one morning I caught her in the act. I had left a few minutes later than usual. As I turned into my street, I saw her standing over my trash can, one hand gripping the handle, the other holding the lid. There was no hesitation, no attempt to look around. She tipped it slowly, deliberately, spilling coffee filters and paper towels across the driveway like she was curating an exhibit. When she finally looked up and saw my car, there was no guilt on her face, just annoyance, like I'd interrupted her while she was setting up for a party. She straightened and said immediately, Your can was blocking pedestrian space. I got out of the car and looked around. The street was empty. There aren't any pedestrians right now, I said. That's not the point, she snapped, but this time her voice held something new. Nerves. For the first time I saw her. Crack, I didn't argue. I didn't yell or accuse. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture. Her standing there beside the tipped-over trash can. Debris scattered at her feet. Her face stiffened. Then she turned and walked away, fast. That was the exact moment the battle shifted. Not because I had proof, but because she knew I did. Still, proof alone wasn't enough. Proof only matters when the right people see it. And while the HOA could reprimand her, they couldn't make her stop. People like her don't change. They just adjust their methods. So I started planning. First, I bought a small outdoor camera. Sleek, wireless, almost invisible. I mounted it just above the garage, blending perfectly with the trim. From my living room, I could now see the entire driveway live on my phone, clear as day. Then I waited. I didn't change a thing. I didn't move the trash can or try to hide it. I left it exactly where it always was, in simple, ordinary routine. Like bait. 2 days passed. Nothing. But on the third morning, just before sunrise, she came. She didn't know about the camera. She didn't know I was awake, sitting at the window with a cup of coffee, watching. She walked toward the trash can with that same familiar confidence, almost ritualistic. She looked both ways, then gripped the handle, and with a force that surprised even me, she shoved it over. This time there was no hesitation, no restraint, just anger. For a moment she stood there breathing hard, and then she smiled. A real, genuine smile. The kind that said she felt satisfaction, not guilt. That smile told me everything I needed to know about her. I had her. But I didn't act yet. Not because I wanted revenge, but because timing mattered. Evidence only has power when the moment is perfect. And I wasn't after proof anymore. I wanted resolution. I wanted her to remember this, not with fear, not with pain, but with the kind of humiliation that burns into memory. That's when the idea came to me. A week earlier, I'd been repotting some plants. I remembered spilling a small bag of flour, how it exploded into the air like smoke, thick and dramatic, yet completely harmless. That was it, the perfect harmless spectacle. The plan was simple, a lightweight container inside the trash can, attached to the lid, filled with flour. If the bin was tipped gently, nothing would happen. But if it was shoved hard, in the way she always did, it would trigger a small burst, sending a white cloud upward. No danger. No chemicals. Just chaos, a pure, embarrassing, unforgettable chaos. I built it carefully, tested it twice in the backyard. Biscuit watched the tests with fascination, sneezing each time the flour puffed into the air. When I saw that it worked, I set it up one last time and placed the trash can at the curb, same as always. Same position, same angle, nothing suspicious. Then I waited. The next morning was silent, the kind of silence that hums with anticipation. The sky was clear, sunlight stretching long shadows across the cul-de-sac. I sat inside, coffee in hand, Biscuit curled beside me, my eyes locked on the live camera feed. The street was still. Then I heard them, her footsteps, slow, measured, purposeful. She approached the trash can like a sculptor about to strike marble. She examined it, adjusted her grip, and placed both hands firmly on the lid. I leaned forward. Biscuit lifted his head. The world seemed to hold its breath. Through the camera feed, I could see every detail. Her focused posture, the tension in her jaw, the same self-righteous glare she always wore. This wasn't just about moving a bin. To her it was control and a declaration that she decided how things worked on this street. But she didn't know what was waiting for her. She gave the bin a hard shove. The reaction was instant. A burst of white exploded upward, a blooming cloud of flour, thick and sudden, like a snowstorm detonating in her face. It spread faster than she could react, coating her hair, her clothes, her glasses, everything. If she had been carved from powdered sugar, she couldn't have looked any whiter, but that wasn't all. A second wave followed, a flurry of light debris, cereal flakes, paper wrappers, a few dry leaves, all caught in the rising cloud, dancing around her like confetti in a parade she never wanted to join. She stumbled backward, coughing, swiping at the air, but every frantic movement only stirred the flower more, clinging tighter to her clothes and skin. For a brief, glorious moment, she looked like a ghost that had been dragged straight out of a pantry. I opened the front door and stepped outside, calm, controlled, almost gentle. Biscuit followed, his tail wagging like this was the best show he'd seen in weeks. She turned to face me, her eyes burning with rage barely contained. But the flower softened her expression into something absurd, turning fury into something almost pitiful. "You," she sputtered, but the word broke apart in the cloud of powder still clinging to her mouth. She spat twice before snapping, "You vandalized your own trash can." The accusation was so desperate it nearly made me laugh. I kept my voice steady. "Actually, I didn't vandalize anything," I said calmly. "But I did set up a camera." Her entire body froze. There are moments when a person realizes they've crossed a line they can't ever step back over, and that was hers. She didn't move. She didn't speak. For the first time since I'd met her, she was completely silent. I held up my phone and hit play. The footage played clearly. Her walking up, gripping the bin, tipping it, then the explosion of white. Her shot captured perfectly, the flower exaggerating every expression like stage makeup, her face twisted. "Delete that!" "You don't have the right to record me." "I do," I replied evenly. "The camera's on my property, and it shows you damaging my property." She took a shaky step forward, lowering her voice as if whispering made her threats more powerful. "If you share that, I'll make sure the HOA fines you into bankruptcy." I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "You're not on the HOA board," I reminded her. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet. It was collapse. Her authority, her confidence, her entire sense of control shattered in an instant. Everything she believed about herself, the neighborhood's self-appointed guardian, crumbled. Without another word, she spun around and stormed back to her house, leaving a trail of white dust behind her like a comet tail. Biscuit barked once, short, sharp, almost celebratory. I went back inside and saved the footage in 3 separate places. Not to humiliate her, but because I knew she wouldn't accept defeat easily. I emailed the video to the HOA board. No explanation, no commentary, just the clip. The response came faster than I expected. Within an hour, Dennis from the board replied asking if I could attend an emergency meeting that evening. I agreed. The meeting was held in the small community center near the neighborhood entrance. Normally only a few people ever showed up, but that night the room was full. Word travels fast in quiet neighborhoods. People weren't whispering. They were buzzing, not angry, not shocked, just tired. Everyone had a story. Everyone had tolerated her for far too long. She sat at the front of the room, arms crossed, chin high, powdered traces still visible in her hair, a reminder she'd tried, and failed to wash away. She didn't look humbled. She looked offended that she was being inconvenienced by consequences. The board played the video on a small projector. Gasps echoed through the room. A few laughed quietly. Others murmured, "I knew it." She didn't flinch. She waited for the board to defend her, but they didn't. They revoked her enforcement privileges on the spot. She was no longer allowed to issue complaints, warnings, or approach any resident about HOA rules. Any further harassment would result in legal action from the HOA itself. She was no longer allowed to issue complaints, warnings, or notes, or approach any resident about HOA rules. Any future harassment would lead to legal action from the association itself. She didn't argue. She stood up, gathered her purse, and walked out. Not quickly, not angrily, just empty, like a balloon finally realizing it had been full of nothing but air. The neighborhood felt different after that. Trash days became peaceful again. No mysterious disturbances, no notes taped to doors, no photos tucked under mats. People who once avoided eye contact started waving again. Biscuit enjoyed his walks without being watched like a trespasser. My driveway stayed clean. A week later, I saw her outside. She didn't look at me or try to speak. She just stood beside her own trash can, placing it carefully at the curb with the precision of someone who finally understood. She was being watched, but not admired. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just walked past with Biscuit, who paused, sniffed the air, then trotted on. As I reached my driveway, I couldn't help but think about how small the spark had been. A trash can, a simple boundary, and a person who couldn't stand not having control. When I reached the door, I glanced back one last time. There was no tension, no hostility, just a woman quietly realizing she no longer owned the story of this neighborhood. Biscuit sat beside me, tail flicking softly. "Looks like the trash finally took itself out," I murmured. He barked once. The street was still. Peace had finally returned. To my driveway, my trash can, and my sanity. Now every trash morning, Biscuit sits beside me again, watching the street with that same curious little face. But the only thing moving out there now is the garbage truck, doing exactly what it's supposed to do. No more unwanted supervisors. No more silent battles. Just calm, simple living, the way it should have been all along, because sometimes karma doesn't need to be loud. It just needs to be timely. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories just like this. And tell me, what would you have done if someone kept messing with your trash?